Well, I'm a Star Trek fan, and I enjoy looking at the original series. In fact, all of the series, all of the movies, and you can see in the original series and in many versions of Star Trek things that used to be science fiction that are now science fact. The cell phone, the mobile phone, the tablet computer, the desktop computer, the laptop computer, all of those things were presaged in the original series. One thing that is still science fiction was Dr. McCoy's medical tricorder, and he had a little scanner, little cylindrical tool that he would wave over the patient, and he didn't have to interact with the patient physically in order to diagnose them or determine what was wrong or how to manage them. That's, of course, still science fiction. We have to interact with something from the patient. But we're getting closer and closer with non-invasive testing.
DNA is the blueprint of life, and now it's the currency of markets. It began with a single genetic sequence, and today, genomics is reshaping industries, driving innovation, and opening new markets. Our conversations explore the people, ideas, and strategies defining the genomics economy, giving you the insights to stay ahead. This is the Helix Exchange, the first podcast about the business of genomics.
Today, we're joined by Dr. Daniel Farkas. He's a molecular diagnostics pioneer with over 35 years of experience leading CLIA labs, shaping policy, and turning emergency technologies into clinical laboratory realities. Welcome, Dan. I'm glad to have you on our show. Before we dive in, let's align a few terms. At GMG, when we talk about the business of genomics, we mean the point at which biological insights turns into commercial infrastructure, when data, testing platforms, and regulatory clarity become investable assets. As a way of getting to know you for myself and for the listeners, a question we always ask here at GMG is, as a person, scientist, entrepreneur, and businessman, what should we know about your DNA? What makes you tick on a personality and cellular level?
Hi, Mark. Well, thanks very much for that introduction and for the question. It's a pleasure to be speaking to the folks listening to this podcast, and I hope that when we're done that folks will have found it worthwhile. My DNA, what makes me up at a molecular, cellular and molecular level, it's an interesting way to put it. I've been in molecular diagnostics for over 35 years. And it was, like many things in life, just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Molecular diagnostics was brand new. And my first job was at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. And that was because there was an ad in Science. The chairman of the department realized that they couldn't find somebody in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, put an ad in a national journal, and the rest is, as they say, a career. And so it's been interesting. Not sure what direction you want to go from here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can keep with that and follow through the rest of your CV. I do know St. Barnabas well. I myself am from New Jersey, and my mom actually started working at St. Barnabas, which is now RWJ Barnabas, about a month and a half ago. So I'm quite familiar. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind sort of just taking, because I don't believe that my introduction to you could at all do your experience justice. So if you wouldn't mind sort of just going briefly through your background and sort of highlighting the points that you think are relevant in the way of genomics as a technology and in the biotech space as it relates to molecular diagnostics.
Sure. I actually started, after I got my PhD, at Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York. Actually started in industry. I did an industrial postdoc at Monsanto's environmental health laboratory. It was their toxicology laboratory, and that was in St. Louis. But that's when I saw the ad in Science and actually began my career in the hospital setting at St. Barnabas. Moved 2 years later because of a great opportunity in my wife's hometown near Detroit, and established the molecular diagnostics service at William Beaumont Hospital. I did that for 7 years, and I realized that there were many opportunities in biotech in Southern California, actually all over the country, but decided I wanted to take an opportunity in industry and see what that was all about. And I joined a startup in Pasadena, California, which was purchased by what was then a Fortune 100 company, Motorola, 2 years later. So I spent 4 years in Southern California, two in the same exact location, same address, doing the same job. But 2 years of that was with a startup, and the other 2 years were after the Motorola purchase. Motorola didn't execute that purchase well, and I could see the handwriting on the wall. I wanted to get back to laboratory medicine in the clinic, and applied for and got a job establishing and running the molecular diagnostics lab at Houston's Methodist Hospital. Texas was not our favorite place to live, and so we moved back to Southeast Michigan, where I did a number of jobs in biotech, and ultimately left Southeast Michigan yet again for industry in New York City, my hometown. Joined a company called Cellmatics, which was devoted to the genomics of women's health. And I really loved my time in New York City, but then the Cleveland Clinic came knocking, and that's an opportunity not to be missed. And so I revitalized a moribund molecular pathology service at Cleveland Clinic. Left there almost 4 years ago now to return to Southeast Michigan, I hope for the last time. And now we're near family, and I'm running my own corporation out of my home office. CLIA, which is the federal law that oversees laboratory medicine in this country, stands for Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, allows one who's credentialed like I am to direct up to 5 clinical labs remotely. And so that's what I'm doing now. And that was 35 years in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Well, I think you did a good job. I do have some questions as it relates to that. I'll sort of start at the beginning. So when you said the opportunities that took you out to California, you said that they were really intriguing and hard to pass up. Could you sort of elaborate on what that looked like?
Um, it, Everything in life is sales. And I was struck and sold by the notion of point-of-care, handheld-based molecular diagnostics. There are many potential opportunities where you could see that would be beneficial. And that was science fiction in 1998. When I joined Clinical Microsensors in Pasadena, the detection technology that had been developed by the CEO of the company while he was working in a postdoc at Caltech just down the street, unveiled the notion that maybe point-of-care molecular diagnostics is not such a crazy idea. Ultimately, that technology was commercialized in the clinical laboratory in the form of another company many iterations later, but it was an interesting time in terms of developing the different components that led to advancements in molecular diagnostics.
And without necessarily being too aggressive with the company, what made you say it was an interesting time? And you said that you saw the writing on the wall at Motorola that it wasn't going to work. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Interesting is an interesting adjective because it's trying to be nice when you're trying to say something much more pointed.
Yeah.
Motorola spent a lot of money for clinical microsensors. Why they decided that they couldn't make a go of it, I was not privy to conversations in the C-suite, of course. Motorola was a large company. But, they took a shot, and they were trying to diversify from communications. And in point-of-care diagnostics, there's a significant communications component because any information gleaned from such a point-of-care device would have to be sent back to the charge nurse or the treating physician or emergency room administration or what have you. And so they took a swing and a miss, and that's fine. But it was obvious to me that it was not something that was going to take off and be an important part of their product portfolio. and there was an opportunity for me in Houston.
Mm. And so I know you like the difference between science fiction and science fact. Do you think that it would be a science fact now if Motorola were to go in right now and try and do the same technology? Do you think it would work now?
There are three components to every test. There's a pre-analytical component, an analytical component, and a post-analytical component. I have no doubt that Motorola has exceptional post-analytic capabilities in terms of communication. We talked about how test results have to be sent to various places, but Motorola has no special technology that would be miniaturizable, if that's a word, to point-of-care molecular diagnostics. Um, So I think that that's something that they wisely walked away from. And besides, in the late 90s, early 2000s, sequencing was not as didn't play as significant a role as it does today. It's the gold standard for all of molecular diagnostics, and there are other companies working to miniaturize sequencing technology. Um, Certainly, a communications company could play an important role in the various components necessary in delivering a clinical test result.
Right. And so with the technology today and with sequencing today, what do you think would make a company as that is in the communications or in any other type of industry be able to walk into molecular diagnostics and turn something that used to be science fiction and make it into science fact?
The answer is an old joke. There's a phrase in or there's an old joke in real estate. What are the three most important words in real estate? Location, location, and location. And in molecular diagnostics or genomics, the three most important words are content, content, and content. Point being that certainly the technology exists and the expertise exists at many companies around the country, around the world, uh, to develop point of care molecular diagnostics, but it's about content. Is that test going to be important? Is it important to assess whether or not somebody's going to be able to metabolize, for example, a depression drug at the psychiatrist's office, if they could test for it there and determine if it's the right antidepressant medication for that particular patient? This could be done, for example, with point of care based pharmacogenomics test, and the technology exists. But is it an emergency? It's extremely important to manage folks with depression well, but does it have to be done at the point of care? Maybe. Could be done at the pharmacy. Um, so there are many different ways to look at this problem, many different technologies that can be brought to bear. But the important thing is, are you developing a test that will be useful to physicians in managing their patients? And unfortunately, as importantly, do you have a reimbursement strategy? Because clinical laboratory testing, particularly molecular diagnostics, can be expensive. And physicians don't like to get angry calls from their patients when they get an unexpected bill from the laboratory medicine department. So
Sure.
it's as important to develop the technology and the content and the target of the test. That's important, but as important is to develop a reimbursement strategy so that third-party payers, insurance carriers, will pay for the test. Very, very important. That's something that's often overlooked by those who want to be entrepreneurial within genomics.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a super interesting point and definitely a critical point for our audience. And it definitely seems like that is a major thing. You need funding to create a company. And you think that that was something that Motorola had in mind? Not to keep coming back to them, but it was the example brought up. Do you think that they had the reimbursement strategy laid out, or?
I don't want to keep picking on Motorola. um, no, they were trying to develop a technology into something that could be useful in a pathology department, laboratory medicine department, a clinical laboratory, and then reimbursement would become the problem of the customer, the
Hmm,
clinical, for example.
yeah. Hmm. That is definitely a difficult reimbursement strategy, especially right now when healthcare is like all expenses are just incredibly high everywhere. That definitely seems like a difficult angle to take.
It's a particularly difficult thing because there are at least three stakeholders: payers, patients, and physicians. And they all have different needs and desires within the structure that is American medicine.
Yeah. And it is only evolving. So, with the idea of healthcare evolving and back to the idea of science fiction versus science fact, what do you think is science fiction now that in 20 years might be science fact?
Well, I'm a Star Trek fan, and I enjoy looking at the original series. In fact, all of the series, all of the movies, and you can see in the original series and in many versions of Star Trek things that used to be science fiction that are now science fact. The cell phone, the mobile phone, the tablet computer, the desktop computer, the laptop computer, all of those things were presaged in the original series. One thing that is still science fiction was Dr. McCoy's medical tricorder, and he had a little scanner, little cylindrical tool that he would wave over the patient, and he didn't have to interact with the patient physically in order to diagnose them or determine what was wrong or how to manage them. That's, of course, still science fiction. We have to interact with something from the patient. But we're getting closer and closer with non-invasive testing. One could even imagine, if I'm going to be true to the spirit of your question and try and imagine something that might be possible in a decade or two or three, one could imagine being able to develop a technology and a device that would measure volatiles or organics in one's breath, and then perhaps ask questions about infectious diseases of the lungs or lung cancer or bronchial disease. Purely science fiction, but again, we're talking about 2046, not 2026.
And do you think that genomics as a platform could be used for that? Because every time you exhale, there's certain amounts of saliva that are like pushed out in the breath. Do you think that we could use DNA within the saliva that could allow us to high level analysis?
Entirely possible, but we shouldn't get hung up on genomics at the expense of all the other analytes that are interrogated daily in the clinical laboratory. That's why we have labs in hematology and immunology and flow cytometry and microbiology, clinical chemistry, molecular diagnostics, on and on and on and on. So it might be just as important to measure the DNA that might be present in a droplet of saliva in our little science fiction scenario, but it might be equally important to measure some chemical analyte. So again, this gets back to content, which another way to think about content is what question is the test trying to answer for the physician? What are they going to do with the information to help manage the patient? That's the thing to start with.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe then a more holistic approach that includes all of those different angles would be a better content machine that can really encapsulate everything that we're looking for in a test.
There's a catchphrase came up in the last decade or so called omics or multi-omics or multifaceted omics, because we can look at genomics, we can look at transcriptomics, we can look at proteomics, we can look at metabolomics. These are things that look at DNA, RNA, proteins, organic metabolites or volatile metabolites, respectively. So we don't necessarily have to look at one biomarker to answer a clinical question. It's entirely possible that it would be this hypothetical test that we're discussing would be multivariate in nature, and we'd be looking at multiple variables to understand how they interact to cause disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly an interesting proposition, and it would be very fascinating to
And
track.
purely speculative.
Yeah,
But
but I mean, with the emerging technologies, and as you said, their multi-omics is actively a thing, and I personally know of many labs that use multi-omics for a variety of applications, not just in molecular diagnostics, but truly it is a groundbreaking field that really encompasses a lot of what makes us human, and it's a very interesting and, as I said, evolving field that has potential to go many, many different directions, not just in molecular diagnostics.
You're exactly right. And it's something that I found to be true during my career. Technology always outpaces our ability to regulate the technology if indeed we think it should be regulated. And in this country, laboratory medicine is regulated. And sometimes technology outpaces, it's ahead of its time. We don't know what to do with it in terms of helping a physician manage his or her patient. Well, that's what business plans are for, and I think they probably teach that on the first day of business school.
I guess that also sort of goes back to location, 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 and having the right product at the right location at the right time really does make all the difference. And having the market in the correct location is certainly very important as well.
And
Um,
there's another thing to consider, and that is new technology or a new test or a new application in the clinical laboratory has to be dramatically better than what it's replacing. If it's brand new and it's technology that will answer a question that was never able to be answered before, that's great. But very often it's a replacement or an attempted replacement or a marginal improvement. It's very hard to change in the clinical laboratory because SOPs, standard operating procedures, are validated, and medical technologists have to be demonstrated to be trained and competent in them. And if you change the technology, you have to revalidate it, you have to retrain. It becomes very problematic. It has to be dramatically better or dramatically cheaper or dramatically faster for a lab manager or a hospital administrator to invest in a new technology that would represent an upsetting of the apple cart potentially in the clinical lab.
and this is a bit of a highly speculative question because, of course, none of us know where AI is going to take things. But do you think that AI could promote that? Because, as you said,
Sure.
sequencing is the gold standard, and in some DNA and RNA sequencing is just a collection of data and analyzing the data, and that is certainly something AI is good at.
Absolutely, you're exactly right. I'll go back to what I said a moment ago. There's three components to, let's say, a test based on next generation sequencing. The pre-analytical component, in which we collect a blood specimen, for example, isolate the white blood cells and purify the DNA from those white blood cells. Then comes the analytical component, where we create a sequencing library from that purified DNA and subject it to next generation sequencing. There's not, to my way of thinking, there's not a lot of opportunity for AI in the things that I just described. But then there's the post-analytical component of sequencing, which generates a ton of data. And right now, the data are committed to bioinformatics pipeline, which are computational methods to answer questions about this particular genome that we sequence from this particular blood specimen. Obviously, artificial intelligence can be brought to bear on analyzing those gigabytes, sometimes terabytes of data gigabytes of data from an individual. But then, a particularly appropriate application of AI for genomics is when we multiply the data that I just described by hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions in a particular disease population or country population or subgroup population. And there's so much data there that one can imagine, certainly not somebody like me who is very much a lay person when it comes to AI, but it seems obvious that there's so much data there that large language models computer science tools, mathematical modeling, and AI could be brought to bear on answering specific population level questions.
Right. And we know that the way that products become content worthy and have their actual application is by being more broadly applicable, going apart from the individual who, is one in a trillion or one in a several billion versus a larger population within a disease or within a demographic group. So, yeah, that sounds like a very interesting application of AI and could potentially be a marketable thing because clearly there could be a content group there. So
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
yeah, that's super interesting. Um, do you know of any companies that are doing that? Highly speculative, but
No, I'm sure there are though, but I can't name I can't name any. Not out of confidentiality, just because I'm not that well versed in the topic.
and do you think that I guess more speculative and a slight step back, do you think that there is a genuine opportunity there to utilize AI?
Probably. The reason I don't answer more definitively is because bioinformatics is based on computer science and math, and I went to graduate school to get a PhD in biology. So it's interesting how math and computer science is taken over a significant aspect of molecular diagnostics. I shouldn't say taken over, complemented in a positive way our ability to interrogate the genome and ask important questions about it. The answers of which can be helpful to physicians managing their patients.
And so through all of these tools and through bioinformatics, since we sort of have a better understanding of how to read the human genome, do you foresee there to be a possibility of actually being able to write it or edit it? Edit it in effective and intentional ways.
Yeah, now you're we're sticking a toe in ethical waters that probably beyond the scope of this podcast, A, and B, certainly on any expertise that I have. Monkeying with the genome is fraught with all manner of ethical questions, and I don't know that I want to go there this morning.
That's fair. It certainly is mucky water, and there, yeah, that's fair response. Dr. Farkas, thank you very much for joining us and for helping us bridge between science and strategy. At the Genomics Media Group, we're chronicling how genomics is reshaping markets from healthcare to agriculture to infrastructure. Your perspective on where regulation, data, and innovation meet is truly valuable and insightful. And from all of us here, thank you very much for joining us. And I hope this was a beneficial conversation for you and for our audience. So thank you again.
Thanks very much, Mark. I enjoyed the chat.